Welcome to Rise Above, the podcast where we turn pain into purpose and struggles into strength. I'm Jacqueline, and my journey has been anything but easy, from loss and trauma to healing, growth, and stepping into my authentic voice. Even though this is my story, I hope you'll see pieces of yourself in it, the moments that shape you, the lessons that strengthen you, and the light that continues to pull you forward. This space is real, raw, and relatable. Together, we'll explore the moments that break us, the lessons that shape us, and the resilience that helps us rise above. This episode contains discussions of traumatic loss, violence, grief, and PTSD. So, listeners and viewer discretion is advised. If you have experienced any trauma or loss, please take care while listening. Pause if you need to, and return when you feel ready if you are ready to listen. If you find yourself triggered, consider reaching out for support from a trusted friend, therapist, or local helpline. You are not alone. There's support out there for you. To my family, you may hear parts of my story that are painful or hard to revisit. Please know my intention is never to hurt but to heal. I share these moments so that others know that they are not alone and so that our pain can become a source of strength, hope for others. Listen only if and when you feel ready. To my parents, in this podcast, I'll be sharing parts of my story that may be hard for you to hear. Some of these memories are painful, and I know they involve moments from our past. Please understand that my goal is not to place blame, but to share my truth in the hope of healing for myself and perhaps for others as well. Listen only if and when your heart is ready. Let's begin. So today I want to take you back to where it all began for me, my story. Not the polished social media version, but the real raw truth of how I got here. So those of you that know that I grew up in the Bronx with my parents, 158th Street, Girard, born and raised up until the age of 11. Um, and I loved living there. I loved that was my place. I remember growing up as kids, we would watch the fireworks when Yankee Stadium, the old Yankee Stadium, was there, and we would watch fireworks from the fire escape. My siblings tell me that we used to go until the roof to watch the games. I honestly don't remember that, which I'll talk in another episode. But so born and raised in the Bronx, 158th Street, Girard Avenue. Very proud to say that. Um, we, from 2000 and not 2000, look at that, I'm in the 2000s already. In 1992, because of certain situations that happened in my upbringing, in our home environment, I moved to Puerto Rico with my mom. So that's where the moving back and forth came. So yes, I'm born and raised in New York, in the Bronx, but I also lived in Puerto Rico for a little bit. I also lived in Connecticut for a little bit. Went back to New York, and wanted to do my life in New York because New York is my home. New York is what I know, and then moved here to Miami. So I'm sure you're asking yourself, right? What was it that prompted me to have all these moves, or what just prompted this particular part of it? And there's other pieces that we'll be talking about. That is just an introduction to what I'm going to be talking about in this podcast. However, I'm not going to go in depth in any of these topics today because that's what the other episodes are going to be for. So again, this podcast is going to be raw, relatable. If at any point in time of anything that I share you feel triggered or it's too much for you to listen to, please don't listen. Listen at your own discretion, and know that you know take your time. So grew up, as I mentioned, I grew up in the Bronx. Um, I'll mention 158th Street in Girard because I have nothing but um, nice memories as far as the block. And, even though I never really got out because I was never allowed to get out, I couldn't hang out or do anything. I'm the youngest of four. I'm also 45 years old, and I have one biological child, and I have one stepchild that to me is my son. He is 8 years old, and I have a beautiful granddaughter that just made 14 months yesterday. They grow so fast. And I've had the pleasure for her being born 4 days before my birthday, so we're fellow Virgos. So I'm going to be diving into, growing up in the Bronx and growing up with Puerto Rican parents. My parents married very, very young. They met very young. My mom was 15. My dad was 17. So we're going to dive into that in another episode. Again, this is just an introduction of what the podcast is going to consist of. At 19, I did decide to leave home and live life on my own. One, because I was honestly just tired of moving back and forth. And at the age of 19, I was working. At that time, I had already graduated high school. I did go to college to Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut, while I was living in Connecticut. And I had everything paid for. But me being the person that I was back then and being young, I didn't have time for my boyfriend. And that's really why I decided to stop going to college. I forgot. I was going to say high school. I stopped going to college and I was working in Walgreens. Um, I had a internship in Social Security, which was a paid internship because at that time I was taking up business administration. No, I'm lying. Business management. So at that point, I went to live on my own. I went to live with my brother, my oldest brother's sister-in-law at that time, and that was really the first time. Although I wasn't physically on my own because I was living with someone, but I was on my own. A lot of responsibilities fell on me. So helping within that home, doing everything on my own. Even though I always worked from the age of 14, and I would get my stuff myself. That's when I started wearing contacts and just buying my own lipsticks and little things like that. So I've always worked. Um, and when I went on my own, that was in 1999. I didn't have any kids. I got pregnant in 2000. I got pregnant in the year 2000. And, oh my God, why am I having a brain fart? This is what happens when you're 47. So, yes, I got pregnant towards the year 2001. It was because I was 20. Towards the end of the year, I found out I was pregnant August 8th of 2001, and I hid my pregnancy. I was so scared. At this point, I was living with my brother in Brooklyn and my sister-in-law, and at that time, they had their daughter. They were starting their family as well, and I remember the day that my brother found out. This was way back when internet was broadband and you had to hear the the faxing line to be able. No one could be on the phone. I remember it was AOL Instant Messenger, um, and I remember I was using, I believe, LimeWire, sitting in their room because that's where the computer was. I was listening to LimeWire. I laugh now, but it wasn't funny back then. I was listening to Latin Love from Trilogy on LimeWire, and I was with my comadre now. Back then, and my all my brother said was "Nieka, come here," and I already knew. I was like, he knows. And my when he asked me, my my defensive reaction was, "I am, yeah, I am," and then I started bawling. Right, so again, that would be something we go into later. And he was upset. He was very upset. He called my dad, and at that time, my dad was a taxi driver, so he came over. And because of our family history, he thought I was gonna say that I had some sexually transmitted disease. And just for context of that, he had a sister that was, into drugs, and she contracted HIV. So that was his trauma. So that was his fear. But it was just to tell him that I was pregnant. So I told him, and of course, my brother is super overprotective with me, even now. And even though he was very upset, like I think for like a week and a half, I felt like I was walking on eggshells. And by the time, let me give you a little bit more context. It wasn't only that he found out that I was pregnant. It was also because I was already 4 months pregnant when they found out, and I hadn't seen the doctor. Like I didn't know. So what I was trying to do was I was trying to get an apartment. So I filled out a housing application, and then move. And then after I had all of that, let them know. That was just I was 20. I was 20, and I just did. I was like, oh my god, how am I gonna? What am I gonna do? Right? Um, and I always say to this day, I always say to this day, my daughter saved me, um, because from the time that I left my my home, that I went to live on my own, I was kind of repeating the same behaviors that I was put in, where I was jumping from house to house, moving from place to place. I didn't have anything steady. I was never allowed to go out and hang out and do parties. So at that time, I was going to parties. I was hanging out until 2, 3 in the morning in New York. Even though I lived in Connecticut, my entire family is from New York, and a lot of them went to Connecticut at a certain point of their time, right? So I was hanging out, and I was like, "Ooh, what's this? This is new, right?" So I was all over the place, and I look back at it now, and I'm like, so when I had my daughter, um, my brother moved. They bought a house, so they moved to Staten Island. I moved with them because when I had my daughter in 2002, April 2002, and bless their souls, like my sister-in-law, when she found out, she was like, "No, we're going to the doctor." Like she went with me. She took me. She helped me get the Medicaid. Like she did absolutely everything. So it's nonetheless, she's more than just she's my sister. Like she's known me since the age of 11. That's when my brother and her got together. Um, I mean, this is someone that I used to call when my brother used to tease me about my weight and call me tugboat and cry to her over the phone and say, "He's calling me tugboat again. Can you do something about it?" So it's more. And I'm 45 years old. So and my brother and her have, oh, no matter what has happened to me, where I have gone, what situation I've been in, they have always been there without me asking. I told you it's gonna be real and raw. And there's no way I could ever repay them for that. Even when I've gone through the traumas that I've gone through in my life, up until present day, before I can blink, they have been there. There has been things that they don't know because I've chosen not to share it in an effort to protect their emotional being, and to protect my brother, and to protect their family. And I'll go into that more in episodes. So becoming a single mom was what I needed. That was God's way of saying you need to slow down, because now you have to watch over someone else that is not yourself. So I started saving up. I worked in Old Navy at the time. I started saving up half of my check, every single check. My brother never charged me rent. I would just pay one of the bills, and we would do the grocery shopping together and whatnot. So I was able, because of that, I was able to save half of my check every single week, and until I was able to have a deposit. Now back then, guys, like this is when you would pay $400 of rent. This was in 2002. So I was able to find an apartment in Washington Heights, Broadway Terrace, which I loved living there. It was a studio apartment. The only reason why it was considered a studio apartment, because the room that was closed in didn't have a closet, but I used that as my bedroom with her, and I had nothing. My daughter and I slept on an air mattress. I had nothing. She had her play yard. My daughter never had a crib. Um, Back then, which I'm surprised, my father's mother bought me a bedroom set. So that was how I got it. And then little by little, like I was given things. So like my as she's my second mom, my sister in law's mother gave me some sofas that back then had the plastic cover that she was getting rid of. So that's how I had a sofa. Um, and I remember mi hermano de crianza, um, and his wife, which loved them dearly as well, they gave me some things from their house that they were moving. So I took whatever I was given. So that, that's when I started being on my own, being a single mom, just me and my daughter, and building myself and continue to work, having a babysitter, in the Bronx, living in Washington Heights. Um, another thing that led into was that in 2011 I was still, well, 2002 all the way up until 2011, I was living in Washington Heights, and I met um, my fiance, may he rest in peace, and that led to, in 2011, me experience the most tragic loss that anyone can ever experience, which was his murder. Unfortunately, my daughter and I witnessed that, so that was something I've never experienced anything like that. And I'll go into little details in a different podcast, uh, episode dedicated to that. That changed my life like you would not believe. And I didn't realize it changed my life in that magnitude until years later. Um, that was something that, um, I don't desire that for anyone. I honestly don't. In the moment, I don't remember much. Um, I remember wanting to protect my daughter. Um, I remember obviously the incident itself. I remember, everything that happened after that in bits and pieces, right? And from that moment, I never went back to that place again. I went back into my to live with my mother. At this point, my mom was living in the same 26 Broadway Terrace, not in the apartment that I had before, in another apartment. She got a transfer to an actual one bedroom that was slightly bigger. And then, I was able to obtain, um, housing apartment, because I was part of the victim advocate. Um, I don't like to say program, but the advocacy that was provided, having witnessed what I witnessed with my fiance's murder. And, um, then I moved into, the Grant houses on 125th Street on the 21st floor, and that was a big step for me because by then I had significant trauma with having experienced what I experienced, and there were certain things that I would look for that I wasn't getting. I was looking for apartments elsewhere, but I would say no because there was just certain things that would make me feel not safe. So I finally said yes to that one. My daughter and I moved in there. I want to say 2012, 2012, December 2012. And again, my brother and I, we did the mudanza. Um, us alone. My hand storage had all my stuff. We went and we did it, and we moved in there. I lived there for 10 years. Um, and from 2016 to 2018, I started to experience financial instability, um, to the point where I almost lost it all. I mean, I would have dispossessed notices on my door. My car was towed several times, and I didn't have the money to take it out. It was towed, not because of payment, because it would be repossessed if it was the payment. It was towed because my mind was so all over the place. I wouldn't notice where I parked the car. So I would park the car in places that it wasn't supposed to be parked. And in that area, if you're familiar with 125th Street in Amsterdam, in, Harlem, I had a lot of schools and construction sites, and I would just park it. Um, so I went ahead and I would park it in places, and I remember I in one incident I was pacing on 42nd Street, not knowing what the hell to do because the car was towed and everything in the car was my daughter's Sweet 16 supplies that I could barely scavenge together to get to throw her the party. And I called my friend, and one of my friends, they came to my rescue and they helped me with that. Um, and again, a lot of these topics I'm going to go deeper into another, podcast episode. And in 2017, throughout that process, I did meet, my husband, via Instagram while I was promoting Herbalife, and he kind of just slid into my DMs. And at that time, I was going through a rough patch with someone that I was seeing, so I thought that he was sent from him, and he wasn't. So at first, I would talk to him about what was going on with that previous relationship, and I didn't think that it was going to go anywhere. It took me 2 years to be comfortable enough to say that I was going to go to the Dominican Republic and meet him. But we were talking for 2 years, FaceTime, everything that you could possibly do. Like the first time that we spoke, we were on the phone like from, I want to say, 3 in the afternoon all the way to sunup. He had his phone on the charger, I had mine, and we would just talk. Like we just spoke. Um, and I finally decided. Now I kept this a secret, so not so many people knew that I was talking to him because I didn't want to be judged. I didn't want to be judged that I was talking to someone that lived in the Dominican Republic that didn't have his papers. I didn't want people to start assuming that he was with me because of the papers. Our relationship started completely different. Excuse me, let me drink some water. So, like I said, and again, I'll talk about this in a different episode, a little bit more depth. So when I went to meet him in 2019, we already had 2 years of getting to know each other where I was comfortable with him and so on and so forth. He had met a couple members of my family via FaceTime. Not all, because I said I was keeping this a secret. So when I finally decided, I told my family, this is where I'm going. I'm going to be there for 3 weeks. I'm going to meet him. We have a really good emotional connection because we spend the 2 years speaking to each other via phone. And I mean, we would watch movies on video and all that. And he had, at that time, he had a 6-month-old son that was living with his mom. And whenever his son was with him, I would see him or whatnot. And when I finally met him, that same day, he proposed to me. I didn't know that he was going to propose to me. So I said yes. And that same trip, we got married. So when I came back, I didn't tell, the only one that knew was my mother and my daughter because I needed my birth certificate. But when I tell you that everything aligns for me to get what I needed to be able to do that, I say that to this day, it was meant for him and I to marry one another at that time. So it was tough, right? Because my brother picked me up from the airport and I knew he was going to be upset. So I didn't say anything. I kept it quiet. I didn't want to say anything because it wasn't that we started the immigration process because we didn't. It was just like, let's get married. We love each other. Um, and we want to eventually be there. And he never put pressure on me to start the process. I started the process, I want to say, maybe 3 to 6 months after. And it was me that said, okay, I'm going to start the process, right? I felt comfortable enough. So that is that. And then in 2020, um, I had just gotten back from spending time with him in the Dominican Republic um, when 5 days later, I received a call that he was in a car accident, and shortly after that news, he had passed on. So I flew to the Dominican Republic in that moment and kind of handle that. So that triggered trauma that I hadn't healed from my previous chapters of my life. So at that point, my stepson, which now is like, he's my son. He's my son. He calls me mommy. We have a relationship. He and doesn't want his dad to be around me. He'll look at, which was completely different because when I first met him, he was giving me this look like, who is this crazy lady with my dad? So I took the stepmom role very, very seriously, and just with the dynamics of what was going on, like with his biological mother and that relationship and all that, which again I'll dive into another episode about devoted about being a stepmom and the different levels of being a stepmom. And to this day, I am in his life. He is 8 years old now, and can nobody tell me that that is not my son? That is my son. I do as much as I can for him. I do, like, even at the distance. I'm there. I'm the one that's there. So following all of that, I decided to move to Miami. There was a lot of factors that played into my decision of moving to Miami, because of the trauma that I experienced with my husband's loss that triggered wounds that I had not dealt with from the previous loss. And I needed to focus on my healing and not on my healing. My dad was going through a lot of health issues, and I was starting to travel back and forth from Miami very frequently to help my sister with my dad's appointments. And then we were told that he had cancer and that he would have to have the tumor removed from his neck and undergo radiation. And honestly, I'll be quite honest, like none of us thought that he was going to survive that because my dad is older and he has a lot of health issues, kidneys, diabetes, cognitive disorder, which is like a step before dementia, on top of the fact that he's aging. So I moved to Miami to help, and that was probably the most difficult decisions that I've ever had to make, because I thought my daughter was going to come with me, but because I was moving so fast and getting it done and just wanting to get away from everything that apartment was holding, she decided not to go. But my daughter is an amazing kid. I raised her well. Like at 19, she had more than what I had at the time that I decided to move. So I knew that she was going to be okay. She didn't want to stay in the apartment. I helped her find an apartment. She found a great apartment in New Rochelle. I still with her a little bit before I actually moved to Miami. And then I moved to Miami, and she came down in the drive with me, and she left. And the day that I had to take her to the airport where we separated was the hardest day of my life. My daughter had been with me since forever, and no one prepares you. You know that your kids are temporary in the sense that you're raising them to be a good woman for someone else so they can start their family, or to be a good son to someone else. But you don't prepare that. So it was difficult for her. It was difficult for me as well. But it was something that I needed to do, because I knew that in going on this journey of healing, I would have scarred her more. And I didn't want to scar her more. I needed to be on my own and not focus on being a mom, and not focus on anything else but what I had to live with. And it was difficult. It was really difficult. And some steps like that are not easy. To this day, she now lives in Connecticut, and I'm still here in Miami. She has had a baby, and not because she's my granddaughter, but she's just so delicious. And she's so full of joy. Like, being a grandparent is, there's no words. There's no words to it. And we're still very close. I think it brought us closer. And then when she went to have the baby, that brought us closer, because I haven't skipped a beat. So I go back to New York and in Miami. I'm actually in the process of trying to relocate back to New York, but I don't want to live in the five boroughs. So that is that. And while I've been here, I decided to pursue my education. So I mentioned earlier in the podcast that I had started business administration, and then while I was with my fiance in Washington Heights, I decided to do the University of Phoenix online, and do that. And I did a Bachelor's of Science in Arts. I didn't know what I was doing, honestly. I was just picking stuff that had short time frame of being completed, and then everything happened with him, and I couldn't finish. And then I decided to go back and do post university online for a bachelor's in human services, and then my financial aid exhausted, so I couldn't afford to pay it out of pocket, so I didn't do it. And then I have one of my very close friends, one of my bestest friends of my adulthood. She was like that nagging little bird in your ear. So when you're gonna finish it, Yanka? So when you're gonna go back? Because in the organization that I worked for, you needed your 4-year your degree to move, and I was just like, girl. to move up within the organization. I'm like, I don't want to do assignments. But one day, I was like, you know what? Let me call. Let me call and let me see if this is even possible. So when I called, they told me I only had a year and a half left to finish. So everything aligned in the sense that financially covered the portion of it. Then again, we had the issue of I ran out right when I was getting ready to finish the um the bachelor's program, and everything worked out. I tell you, when things are meant for you, it's gonna align in a way where you're gonna be like, holy crap. So I was able to get a loan to cover the rest of it, and I graduated in May of 2025 with my bachelor's um, in human services, and I'm now currently pursuing my master's in business administration with them. And then after that, we're done. We're done. And that was just something that I needed for me. It was something that I started, something that I felt like I had to show. At the end of the day, when you have kids, they're looking at you. They're looking at everything you do. You're their role model. So for me, it was okay. It doesn't matter how long it took me. This is going to be a benefit for me in my career of wherever my career takes me. And it's also going to show my daughter that it doesn't matter how long it took you, as long as you finish it, as long as you make the adjustments that you need, right? So that's what I did. Um, so while I was also here and going through in the past 12, 13 years time span of trauma, trying to rebuild myself and healing, I gained a lot of weight. A lot of weight. I was just, I'm an emotional eater. So I ate whenever I had to deal with an emotion, whether it was from the first loss, the second loss, or anything else that was would come to mind. I would eat. I would eat. So at the age of 43, I was at my heaviest. I was at 283 pounds. And I decided to take control of that, and I had bariatric surgery. So I had the gastric sleeve on November 3rd, 2023, and since then I've lost about 110 pounds. Um, and I started to embrace my health journey, something that I thought that I would never do, and I'll dive into that a little bit more as I build out the episodes for the podcast. But I don't regret that decision. Um, when I was 283 pounds, I had to sleep with a sleep apnea mask because I would stop breathing several times within seconds while I was sleeping. I was pre-diabetic. Um, I would not wear anything but leggings and a t-shirt because I didn't want to buy anything and see my actual size. Um, and I really wouldn't go out to too much pieces, especially in places where I felt like people were looking at me and my weight and was saying, "Oh my gosh, she's so heavy." So I really secluded myself in there. Um, but that was the heaviest. Like my knees would hurt. I would go up the stairs, and I would be fatigued. And I live on the third floor. I would be fatigued and even walking outside, I would be fatigued. I couldn't keep up with my son when I would go to the Dominican Republic because I was just so exhausted, and I would be out of breath. And at this time, he's ranging from 4 to to 6, and I'm like I struggled a lot, and um I would try several things, and it just my mind wasn't in it. My mind wasn't in it, and I really felt like my stomach was too big. There was just no way that I could change my portion size, um, because I had this is the heaviest that I've been. That was my mentality, so that's why I decided to do the bariatric process. It was an expensive process. Thankfully, my insurance covered absolutely everything for it, so that was meant to happen. Um, Another thing that we're going to be talking about as I build out these episodes is living with PTSD, depression, and finding resilience through it all. I have PTSD. I suffer from depression, functional depression, which is something that people do not um, typically speak about, um, because I think that people have labeled depression under one full image: people that are sad, people that sleep a lot, people that are introverted, and that's not the reality. So we'll talk about that as I build these episodes. So let's just take a moment um, to reflect on all this that I've shared with you all. You know, everything that I've gone through, all the pain that I've endured, all the healing that I've had to do. is what makes me me. It's my story. It's where it has gotten me to where I am today. Things absolutely could have broken me. Could have taken me to a different path. Maybe alcoholism, maybe drug use. Um, really could have, right? But they actually made me who I am. They built the person that I am today. So that's a purpose behind as well me wanting to have this podcast, me wanting to share my story with others. Because I know that I'm not the only one that has gone through this or similar things to what um, people experience. So why not use my story as an inspiration to others and put it out there? So, and I'm going to read you something that I wrote just to reflect on it a little bit. My story isn't just about surviving. It's about transforming pain into purpose. And I hope that you, as you listen, you reflect on your own story, the places you've been, the storms you've weathered, and remember that no matter how dark it gets, there's always light to rise toward. I've been in dark situations. When I say dark, I mean, and I went through it alone, and partially because I didn't want my family members to see me in that light. I've always been the strong one. I've always been the one to um, do what needed to be done. So when my foundation started cracking, I didn't want to see weak. I didn't want hand me outs, right? It was so hard for me to ask for help. And there were certain members of my family that knew that I was struggling, but would impose themselves to give me more responsibility. And I was suffocating. I was suffocating, but I never let my daughter see it. There were times where I didn't know what we were going to eat, and I have a good amount of friends that knew me and were there and helped me, and just I didn't have to ask. And you'll know who your friends are when you go through something. It is so easy for anyone to be there for you when you are good and you got a lot going on, right? The moment you hit rock bottom, that is when you're going to realize who your friends are. That is when you realize who your family is. And pay close attention because they will show you. They will show you. So I hope that you guys enjoy this episode. I want to thank you for joining me today for this first episode of Rise Above. And again, if this spoke to you, please subscribe, like, follow, and share with anyone that you feel that needs this reminder and that they're not alone. And remember that no matter what you've been through or what life throws your way, you can always rise above it. Always. There's always light at the end of the tunnel. It may not be what you thought it was going to look like, but follow the signs that align. When the stars align, they align. Remember that. Again, thank you for watching. See you in the next episode.